Hello, dear friends, and welcome to the Early Music Podcast. My name is Darina Ablogina, and this season holds something truly extraordinary as we dive into the heart of the Early Music Summit. How can we embrace the bigger picture of research, education, performance, and creation? How will we redefine our field in a more open, inclusive, and balanced world? Join us in shaping the future of the early music scene with the Early Music Summit. And today my guest is...
Hello, I'm Reginald, or Reggie Mobley. I'm a professional countertenor based in the US, based in Boston. A wide-ranging career in Baroque and modern music, as well as a lot of work in diversity and social activism.
And could you share your journey of becoming a singer?
Of course. So I was born and raised in the Deep South in America. I started as a young child in the young cherub gospel choir, singing as a boy soprano. Later on, I started playing trumpet in middle school and then went back to the church choir later still, and also played keyboards a little. I took piano lessons for about 2 years. Even though I had an art scholarship for college, I was able to get in a historic Black college that's also associated with the faith I was raised, Seventh-day Adventism. I was able to get them to not only accept my application, but also match my art scholarship for music. So I went to college on a trumpet performance scholarship. I didn't touch the trumpet a single day. I immediately switched to voice and took lessons and started singing from there. I was there maybe a year, and I went back to Florida. My hometown, Gainesville, is where the University of Florida is located, which is one of the largest public universities in the U.S. And I started taking lessons there. Went to UF, and it was there that I sang in a barbershop quartet, where I sang the top line, which is basically an alto line. So I didn't realize I was doing this, but I was basically teaching myself to cultivate and train that falsetto and head voice, the alto part of my range. And my voice professor heard me singing in my quartet and dragged me to his office and had me sing through scales, and he stared at me, and I thought I was in so much trouble, but he basically stopped and said, you're a countertenor. And I basically said, well, what's that? And he said, well, this is basically what you'll be doing for the rest of your life. And I haven't proven him wrong yet. Since then, I've gone on, not just to train as formally as a countertenor, singing, the normal diet of Baroque music and things like that, but I also still sang gospel and spirituals in a style, in Black American style. I also sang musical theater. Within the barbershop quartet, I actually joined a quartet and moved to Tokyo in 2001, 2002, and sang for Tokyo Disney for 2.5 years, where I sang as a singer-actor, always as a countertenor. And so when I returned to the US, I went to Florida State University, continued my music education, and have basically remained as a formal countertenor since then.
Your presence brings a distinctive perspective to the classical music world. How do you perceive your role in contributing to a more diverse and inclusive landscape?
Thank you. That's a great question. I often have to think a lot about my contribution to the classical sphere through, in regards to diversity and equity. And honestly, the simplest answer is the most present and the easiest answer. It's the fact that I am existing and performing in the classical sphere as a Black person, as a Black American. Just by being here, I am kind of a canary in the mine shaft for other kids of color, not just Black, but all across the spectrum of Asian, of Hispanic, Muslim, any kids who are sitting in an audience and see a person of color, not just sitting somewhere in the back or off on the side, but face forward as the soloist or as the featured artist, and giving them the understanding that it's possible for them to do it as well. We forget, maybe people of color we don't really forget, but typically no one ever thinks of representation as truly impactful, but truly it really is. On the other side, I mean, think about how often they'll change the color of a superhero or change the color of Ariel in Little Mermaid, and how much of a response that was. They don't, especially white Americans can't admit it and won't think about it, but the moment you take that representation away from them, they are cognizant of it. Maybe it's subconscious, but they know and they feel that change, and they respond in kind. So it's so much more for someone who has never had that experience or representation to just see it and behold it for the first time, or know that it's there. And beyond that, I do a lot of advocating on behalf of not just having more people of color on stage and behind the stage as far as administrations and boards, but also the very spots on the page themselves in regards to making sure that the repertoire that we do is somewhat more equitable and more diverse, and not just finding composers of color like Ignatius Sancho or Lusitano or, Xavier de Saint George, but also female composers like Isabel Leonarda and Kotzlani and Fanny Mendelssohn. Like, that is diversity. Diversity isn't just another word for Black. It's for truly a mixture of everything that we are, and showcasing what humanity is. I mean, if musicians, if artists, if we are truly to be guardians of culture and kind of curators of humanity, then if we aren't showing what humanity is, then we're failing. We obviously have an immediate blind spot. So I think it's important to show those things. And also, in addition to what I said before, I think it's also to recognize and start to kind of give some thought and credence to who we think and understand of as queer composers as well. So understanding the queer element of Schubert, understanding the queer element of Handel and Charpentier, and accepting those things as well. Giving that representation on all levels to everyone possible is my ultimate goal.
Do you have any specific tools how to work in order to see and detect these queer elements in early music field or in music of the ancient times?
Well, there have been writings. There are many writings and circumstantial letters and correspondence between not just composers, but people who surround the composers. I think Ellen T. Harris is a Handel scholar who was the one who really first kind of broke the seal on thinking of Handel as a queer composer, because she was always looking not just at the correspondence between Handel and others and looking at the society around it, but also the people that were surrounded Handel. When you look at the whole sphere, it's easier to see it from a three-dimensional view than just from what people may have said or just not thought about for so long. I mean, to think of the idea that musicologists, when focusing on the music of Handel and the life of Handel, if they aren't queer themselves and don't understand the coding and the things that we understand inherently, they'll overlook these things. And there may be things that are just blaring that just haven't been seen as, oh, this is queer coding, in 18th century or earlier, because we do have some writings like the artist, the sculptor Cellini from the 15th century, who basically wrote the queer code in so many ways. And so it's important to kind of look with fresh eyes from a person who understands the perspective to look and see that perhaps these things may have changed. Now, to be clear, the idea of someone orienting themselves as gay or straight didn't really exist until the mid to late 19th century. So you can't say one way or the other. You have to look at the context and not say that Handel was gay or that Bach was straight, but that, that Handel perhaps was queer. Like, we can't, because gay didn't exist. The idea of that didn't exist. And so there's so much more to it, and that I'm able to really kind of get into. That might take quite some time, but the work is being done, and we are starting to think more forward about these perhaps the truths of these actual composers, and giving more attention to their lives as they exist. It's great to know their music and to hold on to that, but they were still people too. And the more we understand how human Bach was, the more we understand how human Mozart was, the more we can relate to them and further relate to their music. Because you and I inherently love and understand early music and classical music, of course. But think of the person outside your home right now, the person driving the truck outside my house right now. I mean, these are the people that we are supposed to reach, that we want to reach and share the beauty of art with. And if we don't give them substantial access points to find themselves and give themselves some sense of onus and belonging to the music, then it's so much harder, as it's as very evident by the way society is right now in regards to how much music is appreciated.
That's a great connection to the choice. In what ways has your personal narrative informed your career choices and the pieces that you choose to perform?
That's also a very good question. I think that a lot of it comes to the fact that I grew up, as I mentioned before, surrounded by gospel music and spirituals. And and Black communities in particular, just in general, tend to have this almost instinctual, unexplainable connection to music, where it's almost like another sense in itself. Like throughout all the horror of slavery and migration and war and the civil rights and having the Ku Klux Klan, like throughout all these things that have battled and embittered the especially particularly from my point of view, the Black American people, there has been this sense of resilience that has always remained and been safe kept by song, by spirituals, our ability to process grief, to show joy and pain, and to even send messages of the idea that the Underground Railroad is coming through and there's a chance to escape. All of that is held in our music. There is music, especially song, spirituals particularly. I mean, it's a member of every Black family, as far the way I kind of understand it, the way I've been raised and the way I think. And having that kind of connection to music, I kind of seek that in everything else I hear. And I heard that in early music. I heard that in Bach. I heard that in Schütz. I mean, even when you think about it, and I say this often, in 1619, or 1618, the beginning of the 30 Years' War happened, which was a source of such pain and trauma and grief in Europe. But yet 1 year later, in 1619, the very first slave ship hit Jamestown. I mean, these two great events happened at the same time. I mean, for us, it went on for another, 400 years, and even in some ways is still happening now. But when I kind of saw and read and about the 30 Years' War and listened to a lot of the music that came around about that time, and after, even the music of Bach, of Johann Sebastian, I began to see this connection, this similar connection of the way that music kind of processed a lot of grief and pain in the same way that it does with spirituals for us, as the way slave songs did. It kind of gave me this idea that, oh yeah, of course, because no matter the color of their skin or no matter what side of the Atlantic they're on, they are still people, they are still human. And I think that no matter what, there is something beyond just styles and periods and forms and theory, but there is still that idea that music, no matter what, should always reach beyond just the idea of art and entertainment, but it should be service. It should reach people. And I think that through any and all music, there is a way to reach people. I want to always connect with someone near me, the person next to me. And I see that if I'm able to sing and perform Bach and Vivaldi and Mendelssohn, with the same understanding, that same kind of owned that sense of belonging and passion that I have in gospel and spirituals, that it truly does reach, it truly does affect. The practical magic of that music is always shown, where it's no longer just this set piece, this art piece on a pedestal, but it is a living thing. We want to sing and perform like the spots are still wet on the manuscript. And so that's kind of where I kind of go with that understanding and that thought process.
I admire this connection that you have made between the gospel songs and the pieces written by Bach or 16th century composers. That's a beautiful thought. Are there specific changes you would think of to enhance diversity within the classical or early music sector?
Absolutely. I believe that in order to balance the scale, you have to put your thumb on the scale. It's easy to open the door and say that it's possible for anyone to become a great soloist or to become, a concert master or a conductor. But the truth of the matter is there are so many sources, there are so many motivations and circumstances outside of music that prevent, let's say, a low-income person or a person of color or a queer person or, to find access to that. It's so easy for a middle-class or wealthy white person to fly to New York and apply at Juilliard for their conducting program. But for someone like me, it's not even would have been financially difficult, but I was raised to feel unsafe and unwelcome in those spaces. So I think what I would love to see, what we have to do, is a little bit more evangelical thought. I think the idea of going out, reaching out, going out, how beautiful are the feet of them? Like going out and actually reaching out to these communities. I think it's important for us to recruit, to perhaps like for Juilliard and Yale to go to these historic Black areas and historic Black colleges and recruit them. Go to where they're comfortable. Go to where, make ourselves, as the gatekeepers, make ourselves vulnerable in their spaces, to be a guest in their space, and to show them that we really do appreciate and want these changes. I think that's important, to go and actually reach out to the people that we want to be here, because they may not, even though we say that we're welcoming, they may not understand that or think that the door is open for them. I think that's very important. I think just an honest, concerted effort to reach out and give these opportunities to them. Because, and I think the mindset of what is regular or default needs to change as well. I was in a situation, I'll give a small example to kind of answer your question. I was in a situation where someone was trying to hire a person of color, for a concert, because, this was past the pandemic. This was after George Floyd was murdered. And so there was all this huge worldwide effort to really kind of answer the question of diversity again. And he asked, well, what, do you know this a person of color that I can hire? I would love to have. And I offered a few names, and I said, well, that person isn't quite you, or that person isn't quite this other, well-known, Black artist. They're not quite at that level. So, I mean, do you have anyone else? And I thought about it. I said, well, why do you hold that standard against another person of color if you decide that you don't want to hire this person, you will happily and easily, without thinking, hire a white person who is at the same level or less. Like, there seems to be this acceptance of not being quite at a higher level of experience, or even being mediocre, that isn't applied to whites as it is to people of color. We have to reach this standard of only the best possible people of color, are worth hiring. Like, we have to prove our worth and be an exception in all cases. And I think I want that mindset to change completely. I think we need to just stop expecting every Black and female conductor and queer person and Asian person to be at the level, of someone who's been doing it for 30 years, who has had every opportunity. We expect them to be something that they're not, when we forget that, someone like Anne-Sophie Mutter or someone like Helmut Rühli or all these other musicians, they were able to get these experiences. Like, it was never questioned that they had someone who trained them, that they were apprenticed, or they had someone who helped them fix their mistakes. And we gloss over those aspects with a lot of white musicians, but we kind of put them into a spotlight when it comes to musicians of color. And so I really want that to change. I really, truly want us to find a way to that colorblind, equitable world. But the only way we're going to get there is if we are intentional by noticing what's missing on stage and off stage. And I think that just being honest and open about these things will in some way help things change. I at least I think so, and I hope so.
Thank you so much for talking about these difficult topics and difficult questions so openly. I think people should be aware of this, and they should reconsider, and they should reflect on this subject. You were mentioning this feeling you felt unsafe and maybe not always welcomed as a child in certain circles. And how did it change? And how do you feel now? Does this feeling appear sometimes? How would you describe it now?
Oh, it still exists. For many musicians of color, this feeling of unwelcomeness reinforces the very present imposter syndrome that exists in most people. But the thing about those feelings is that they were so often backed up. And as I continued to find success in this career, the more I saw some of these things. It actually happened when I moved to Boston. I was heading to a rehearsal. I was early, and an elderly woman came up and she passed me as I was standing in front of the rehearsal space. This was at a church. And she said, "Oh, good morning." I said, "Good morning to you, ma'am. How are you?" She's like, "I'm doing fine." It's like, "Great, good to hear." I thought that was it. I thought, wow, how welcoming people are in Boston. Not true. And she said, "Well, just so I need to know, I left my purse in the parish hall. Would you mind going and opening that up and getting it for me?" I was like, "Oh, yes, go right on. Go inside the church and I'll get that for you, ma'am." And of course I didn't. But that was the thing that always happens. Like, they think I'm the janitor. Or they think that I don't belong here. How often when I'm heading to my dressing room in concert halls, security officers will stop me and ask me if I know where I am. Or people will literally come up to me and assume that I'm the custodian. Or that, when you get reviews, they always talk about how they compare you to another Black person, or will say things for me. They'll compare me to athletes, like NFL players. They always comment on my physical look before they really talk about my voice. It's this constant, these microaggressions that are the constant kind of cuts that we live with every day. There's all this emotional pain and labor that a person of color who is even successful in this field has to kind of shoulder just to get on stage. There are always cases of conductors who will just casually throw the N-word into a rehearsal. And not only is, even if it's not directed at the person of color, perhaps the only one in the orchestra or in the choir, but not only they're offended and hurt by that word, but everyone else in the orchestra or the ensemble in the room will obviously tune in and then put all of this attention on that one person. So you are now carrying all of this emotional weight. And it's all of that we have to overcome, that we insist on diving through to get to this art that we love. Like, I can't imagine a day where I can walk into, Geffen Hall or Symphony Hall and not immediately feel nervous and trying to hold myself so that the people around me won't assume that I don't belong there. That happens in the, Concertgebouw or the Barbican Center, whereas as the only Black person, I have to make sure that I feel as though I'm not threatening to the people around me. And it's a huge weight that every person of color has to carry. And in this world, in this sphere. And until we see more of me, until we normalize this, and until even well-meaning colleagues and employers start to just understand and at least open their minds to the idea that this is how our lives work, things won't change. They will continue to enjoy having Reggie there on stage, but they won't in any way be concerned with all of what I have to carry, all the luggage and baggage that I have to bring with me just to get to that point. They never really understand that I have to always had to try and behave twice as hard. I have to be twice as smart. I have to be twice as attentive. I have to be so much more just to even get the sense that I'm going to be considered on the same level as the people around me. And that's the world of people of color in classical music. And yet we still come. Yet we still love it. And I think that shows just how that in some cases we love it that much more, that we would put up with all of this just to be able to sing a few notes in the hall. So that's, so yes, that those feelings, those weights have been there since the beginning and they are here now. But I also understand who I am as a person and what responsibility that's on me as someone who can speak to these things. And so I will always take on that weight. I will always answer these calls. I will always do these interviews because it's important, because it has to be said. And thank you for reaching out and asking.
I think it's so important to talk on this subject, especially in our field, classical music field or early music. In a way, it's a bubble where people feel comfortable with certain things and they don't really touch on the subjects that are irritating. And as a woman, of course, I know what you're talking about. So maybe the last question, what message do you hope to leave for aspiring musicians, particularly those who come from underrepresented backgrounds? And how do you envision contributing to a more diverse future for classical music?
I think the message I would say is don't let perception be reality. I think that's what I would say. I would say be bold and still pursue the opportunities you want. And if you're enterprising enough, make the opportunities that you want. But I think that as we progress, I don't ever mean to give a sense of doom and gloom. I think it's important to also say that there are people like you and people, that where Juilliard is changing, and Hamlin High Society in Boston. I created a role for me specifically to deal with issues like this, to understand that there are people who want to try. So I think just don't be afraid and don't defeat yourself before you start. I think the only true failure is not trying. I think as long as you try for a life in this world, I think something is possible. I think it's important to just try. But also, I think it's important to also build a community and understand who's there. Look around and watch videos on YouTube. And if you see, and I've done this, and if you see a person of color in an ensemble, an early music ensemble, or soloist, find a way to reach them. Find them on Instagram or Facebook and reach out and ask questions. I mean, I'm a very open person and I get messages on through Instagram and other social media sites all the time, and I am more than happy to answer. I think the thing is that because if you as a young person of color, a young queer person, is trying to find a way in this world and reaches out to someone that represents them, it is my pleasure to welcome you in, because the more of you that are here, the less alone I feel as well. So I think it's a matter of just truly just finding and connecting and not allowing all that works against us to defeat us. I think it's just important to just go forward and to persevere, to endure until we don't have to anymore.
Yeah, thank you so much for this beautiful and inspiring conversation. This podcast series is a prelude to the Early Music Summit that will take place at Beaux-Arts and Concertgebouw Bruges from November the 30th to December the 3rd of 2023. Stay tuned for our upcoming episodes as we dive deeper into the world of early music. Our next episode is dedicated to collaboration with the Association of European Conservatories, Music Academies and Musikhochschulen. Don't miss out on the exciting discussions and discoveries that are ahead. Thank you for tuning in, and until next time, keep exploring the boundless horizons of early music.
Till the snakes drop, 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 drop from her hands, and the whip from out her hands. Music for a while shall all your cares beguile, shall all, shall all, shall